Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, I'm really excited uh, for this interview with Lee Love. Lee is a man of many, many talents with a great history in so many different creative areas. So, we're going to be jumping into this conversation with Lee in just a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to invite everybody, please, if you have any questions, have any feedback, just drop them in the comments and we'll get to them here on the show. Uh, Also, if you'd like to join us live on air, if you'd like to ask Lee any specific questions here from here in the studio, you can just go to the link we had in the show notes for coming in live, and somebody from the crew will get you on air. So let's get started. I can't say enough good things about Lee Love. He is first and foremost a friend, but he has a great history as he's been a technical director at the major networks. He's uh, been a recording engineer, an editorial photographer, a photojournalist, and founder of the Photo Mentor Academy. So, really a wealth of knowledge, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. So, let's get started. Lee, how are you? Welcome to Streaming
Good,
Alchemy.
John. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. I think maybe you got I think maybe you got to fire your producer though. I think they hired the wrong Lee Love. That guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. That can't be me. uh, Also, you might have made a mistake because I have a big following, but the problem is they're all hecklers. And so you may have a bunch of people calling in, heckling the show. These heavyweights like Greg Gibson and Jeff Fitzgerald and those guys. They might call in heckling the show, so that could be a problem for you.
It's one of the things when you're live, you can't have an ego. That's all. I'll just leave it at that. We
All right.
so but so just as you know, a bit of background. You're even though you've done a lot of different things, your main passion is really around photography. Probably, if I had to sort of pick where your heart
My
is at.
career started as a photographer way back when. That's what I originally started doing.
So, because I think if you if you look at videography and photography, there's there are differences, but there's an awful lot of similarity. So, the aesthetics that go into it, as well as a lot of the technical components, are very similar. So I think it's a natural bridge between the two, and sort of photography is a gateway drug to videography, so to speak. It gets you into it.
Yeah, and a lot of photographers that I work with are actually looking or have made the transition and adding their clients are starting to ask for video. And so they're trying to figure out how can I do this? Should I do this? And what's involved? My joke is, video is just photos at 24 frames a second. So it's really pretty much the same thing as far as if you know composition as a photographer, it's very, very helpful for you as a videographer.
So I mean, that's probably a good point where to jump into talking a bit about the creative process. Uh, so, for a lot of people, they get really engrossed in the technical side, but you're really balancing the technical with the creative, and that I think is probably an interesting place to start. How do you balance those two without?
It's hard. It's really look, I'm a geek at heart. Okay. I love technology. I've always loved technology, but I also have a leg in the artistic aspect. And so, what if you do any research on this, what you'll find out is there's a lot of studies have been done on left brain, right brain, and there's a lot of analytical things that happen with the left brain and and the technical aspects. I think people that are more inclined to be analytical tend to migrate to the technical aspects or technical fields, and people that are using more right brain, that are in more emotions, creativity, music, things like that, tend to use more their right brain. And so I think they it depends on your personality and where your strengths are as to which one you typically use. But I do find it requires both because even as a photographer, you still have to know some of the technical stuff, but at the same time, you learn that enough so that you can then turn that off and transition over to being creative. I describe it as getting out of my own way. If I'm in the middle of a project, I have to learn, okay, I got the technical stuff here. I understand what I'm doing. I understand how the lighting, all it's going to work, but then I have to shut that down and focus on what's in front of me, seeing, truly seeing what's in front of me, not just looking. And that's something I talk a lot about, and learning to see is a really important part. And I don't think enough people learn to see, they just look.
So in some ways, almost you can start to you may want to start photography as shooting on auto to develop the creative side, to not let that get in your head and always be trying to figure out the technical dimension, where sometimes if you just shut that off and say, hey, let's just go auto, but see if I can capture something creative, that may help move.
I have students that tell me, why is it my images on my phone are better than the ones with my DSLR? And the answer is they're not worried about the technical. They're just looking at the creative. They're just looking at what's in front of them. And so, absolutely, I get into a lot of discussions, we'll call it, with people about that. And they're like, oh, you got to shoot on manual. You got to learn the exposure triangle. Yes, those things are important, but are they the first thing you need to learn? No. When we were shooting film, we didn't have a choice, right?
Yep.
You had to know that stuff, or you just get a black piece of material when you at the end of the processing period. But now you spend thousands of dollars on these sophisticated cameras. Let the camera do some of the work. Focus on the aesthetic, and that's going to make more impact on your client or your friends or family than the technical will. I've never had a client say, what aperture was that shot at, or what's or then looking at they're not pixel peepers. They're not zooming in and looking at the noise. They'll look at a picture. In fact, frankly, most of the time they pick the image that I would not have picked. Even a magazine does that to me. Why? They're seeing something more than I'm seeing. They're seeing an emotion. They're seeing a connection with the subject. I'm looking at it from a different perspective, and so that's what makes a great image, is the aesthetics. It's not the technical. Unfortunately, though, we all get caught up in that. Manufacturers of all these technologies, oh, this camera has this has this kind of focusing system, this, and people get hung up on that, and they don't look at what it takes to create a compelling image.
So, I mean, well, first, I just have to say, Greg Gibson did join us,
Oh,
and he says, I am here to heckle for sure. So,
see, there's a professional heckler. I told you.
so uh, for, for people out there who don't know Greg, Greg is a photographer turned videographer, video producer. So
Yeah, a
he
great photographer, by the way.
very similar to Lee, is sort of in that same camp, on both camps of the space. So and I also
In other
have
words, he got thrown out of one field, he had to find another job, is what that means.
so also have, let's see, Drinkwater. He came in and he says that they have their own hecklers, uh, and so we have
Welcome
Eugene.
aboard, John.
So Eugene Laren just said hello from a regular viewer and live there user. Eugene, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So this is good. We're getting into talking about the technique versus creativity, but I guess there's another element to this, which is really the commercial versus the creative, where you know lots of times you're trying to balance those two things as well, just not just in the moment, but also in a career, like you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's very true for videographers, where you can get lost in one path or the other, and you never strike that balance that makes you comfortable or feeds the family.
Well, very few of us get into any of these businesses for video or photography to make a living. I mean, we want to make a living, but that's not why we do it, because we're called to do it. We love the creativity. We start as a hobbyist and we just enjoy it. I mean, I had so many people, oh, I just love photography. I wish I could do it all the time. I wish I could do it as a career. The problem with that, and the difficulty, is that in a commercial environment, when you're working as, what you find out is it's 80% business and 20% photography, because you don't get to shoot as much as you do when you're a hobbyist or an amateur. The way I describe a professional versus an amateur, it has nothing to do with the quality of your work. It has to do with the type of work you have to do. As a commercial photographer, I have to shoot what my client wants. Okay. As a hobbyist or an amateur, I shoot what I want. Now, the way you bridge that gap, by the way, is every photographer should always be working on 2 or 3 personal projects. That will help keep that. You can try different things, you can experiment. That's where your creativity emerges, because now you're the producer, you're the director. Um, but when you're working with a client, there are two kinds of clients. There's the client that will hand you a storyboard and say, this is what I want, or send you a photo and say, this is what I'm looking for, and they want you to kind of duplicate it. That's not your favorite kind of client. The favorite kind of client are the ones, like I do a lot of magazine work that I've done a lot of over the years, and they know me well enough. They'll say, hey, Lee, come back with something creative. Perfect. That's what I want, a blank slate. Let me get on location. Let me find out what's going on. So the technique versus the creative is, I always walk in, I always try and come up with 2 or 3 concepts of the story I'm trying to tell before I ever get there. I do the research, I try and find out who I'm going to be photographing, what their background is, and then I come up with a couple ideas. But then when you get on location and on set, you have to be ready to throw those ideas out. So you try a few of them if the time permits, and then if not, you have to be open. This is where the creativity comes in. You have to be open to what's in front of you, because a lot of times you'll actually run into a situation where what you're presented with is better than what you walked in with in your head. And if I've been in situations where nope, I got to make this work, I got to make this work, and you keep pounding and pounding, and you realize I'm just wasting time. So you got to be willing and open to the creativity that happens in the moment. And that's kind of where I balance the two. Is I try and come up with a concept going in, but I'm also open to being able to be find something more creative at the time. When you work with other people, and this is the same thing in the video, especially in the video world, you can do this as a photographer. You can be kind of a lone wolf in some regards, okay? But in the video world, it's not, it's much more conducive to be working with a team, right? You want an audio guy that knows audio, that can say, hey, we can sweeten this, we can do this. You want a lighting guy that knows lighting, that can come in and add their own spin on it, their own, I call it their own scent on it, and make what your idea is better. And that's where you have to be open to that.
I mean, there is a bit of jazz in all of this, where you're sort of
Oh yeah.
following what's going on around you and then feeding off of that to add your.
Maybe Hannibal Smith and the A Team had that right. Right? Remember, you also talk about
Yeah,
being on the jazz. That
yeah.
was his whole thing. So
So, I think as we talk about doing these different things and being able to be open, part of this is very much sort of to carry the music analogy. In order to improvise, in order to have that creative side, you have to be comfortable with the technical side. But it is
yes.
that extension from there where you don't have to look at what your hands are doing. They just do it and you feel what you want to create with that. So there is a big element of that. But the two actually have to be balanced in a way,
Well,
certainly as a
people
professional.
hire us to solve problems, John. I mean, it's whether you're a video guy or a photographer, they're hiring you to solve a problem. We think, as in when we're looking at it on our side of the camera, we think they're hiring us to take pretty pictures, but they're not. They're hiring us to solve a problem. They either have a message they want to get out, a product they're trying to sell, they want to look good, they're getting married, they want something, a problem they're trying to solve, and getting to figure out what that is, asking enough questions to find that information is vital. Because if you don't know what problem you're solving, then you don't know how to be creative. You don't know how to create that message and do that. And I can't tell you how many stories that I have of being on set and something breaking, something not working, something not showing up, whatever it may be. And your job is to tap dance and make it work without the client worrying about it and solving that problem, which actually is part of the job I really love, because you're thinking on your feet. And so thinking on your feet is a big part of being a photographer and a videographer.
So what you're saying in that is what you're doing is you're communicating for somebody. You're helping them deliver a message, create an emotion. To whether it's like editorial photography or photojournalism, or you're doing something where you're a videographer at an event, all of those things are in some level a way of packaging a message. And, sort of, I know you're a big fan of sort of the telling the story. So finding that
Yes.
story in the story, in the event, in the moment, can actually help you get creative, because when you have to dance, at least you sort of have a general map to dance to. And,
Got to bring the shoes, right?
so look, why don't we talk a bit more about execution, which is really, where these two meet,
Okay.
and one of the things I know is really important to people when they're shooting, and it's a big debate with like full frame versus smaller frame cameras, is creating focus. How do you guide somebody to the part of the image that I want them to be paying attention to? So I'd love to get your thoughts on, different ways you can solve
Well, you
that.
you really hit it when you said storytelling. We are storytellers. That is the job. You can watch them. How many times have we watched a movie and walked out and going, well, that was okay, really good special effects, right?
Yeah.
But there was no story there. And it's the story that you get wrapped up into. And so, the first thing I do when I walk into a situation, let's say I'm doing a magazine shoot and I'm photographing somebody. I was telling this the other day. I did an article not too long ago. It was it was maybe a year ago. The guy was an author and he worked in the White House and he had written a book. And so I did some research, found out what he was all about, and the first thing I do when I'm going to do a photo or video or any of that kind of stuff is I look at the background. Background, background, background. So many people ignore the back. The background can either help tell the story or ignore the story, or destroy the story. And it's a pet peeve of mine because I see people just, put people in a field or against a wall. It doesn't do anything. It might as well be in front of a white seamless. It's just totally generic. So the first thing I do, let's say as a magazine photographer, is what's the background? How can I find a background that will help reinforce that story? Now, you're talking about focus, depth of field, how much is in focus, how much is not in focus. That is one of the most creative tools we have as photographers and videographers. You don't necessarily want everything in focus, but you also don't want it out of focus either. I know a lot of new photographers, they want that 1.4 aperture, they want to blow that thing out, they want bokeh, they want all that creamy background. But if I'm photographing you, if I were assigned to photograph you for a magazine article and it was for, let's say, streaming media or some magazine, then I would want that background to be part of the story, right? I would want it to be a little out of focus, but I want you in a scenario where there's cameras or video or something like that in the background. But if I was hired to photograph you because you saved a cat from a tree, then and I'm in a busy, I want to blur that background. I want to just get it out of the way. I don't want it to and be part of the story. So that's a big thing. Is that the second thing is the focusing is part of the next thing is lighting, color, the lens selection, wide angle versus tight. All those things are elements that you use to tell the story. But unfortunately, so many new photographers, especially, think of them as gizmos, or I got to do this or I got to do that because they see it somewhere else. They're not thinking about what the story is I'm trying to tell, and it's all story driven, in my opinion. If you want to learn about story, watch a TV show with the sound off and watch what goes on in the background. Look at the set design, look at the lighting. Ignore the actors, watch what's going on. All of those things in the background are there to help tell the story.
So I think it is really interesting when you go in and you look at the totality of the situation you're in to sort of pull these elements out. But that has to start with having that story idea, because you don't know what elements you would want, what elements would fit in the framework. So there is that in the site survey. It shouldn't just be a technical thing. If you have the option to go ahead of time, you should be thinking of where do I want to set up? Where would I want, what angles would work? Because that's different backgrounds, different framing that you have
Yeah.
options for.
Well, maybe Joe could bring up the poker photo, and I could, because that's a really good example
Yeah, let me
of
see.
one where That was a story that I was trying to
Okay.
tell.
Yep.
And so this is an image that I shot with these. This, it started off. These guys are poker players. They play poker in the basement of this home, and for fun and stuff. And so I was going to originally do some portraits, and then when I went over and started looking at the site, I said, "Wow, this is great." They had all these poker tables and everything. And I said, "Would you guys want to be up for something a little different?" They said, "Sure." So I created all the props, the cigars, there's the money in there, there's all this, and I said, don't shave for 2 days. And so we shot this photo first, and there's like 5 lights in there, and the whole thing is based on a story that I was trying to tell about the little throwing a little bit of humor in there about these guys ignoring this young lady during this poker game. And so, but the point is, all of the props, all of the things there's in that I created were there little subtle things to help tell the story. The coat, how what they wore, all that stuff was part of the storytelling. The clock on the wall being 9:35 was a part of that. And so, by using those elements, that reinforces the story you're trying to tell.
So, very quickly then, before we get on to the next piece, I just want to say a few. We have a few more people joining us. So we have, let's see, we have Dean Home from Virginia. Dean, thank you.
Hey,
Uh,
Dean, how are you?
so we
I know
have
Dean.
you. Okay. So we have uh, Sase. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but thank you for joining here. This is always great. We have Stephen Hayward. So again, this may be another heckler, so we just have to be careful here.
Yes, another professional heckler, a really good one, by the way, I might add.
so
I told you, you got to look out now. You're in trouble.
so we have Scott. Scott, thank you. He says hello to both of us.
Hey,
Scott
Scott.
Scott's a great guy. He says the only message I like to deliver is pay me before the event. So
Yeah. Oh wow, you guys get paid, man. That's I
so
got to figure out how to do that.
so
That makes it a lot more interesting if you get paid. I think.
so so Lee, let's dive in again. We talked a bit about lighting and how
Mm.
you use 5 lights and other things. When you have more of a studio shoot where you're at a where you have more control of the environment, you have flexibility there. But how do you deal with lighting when you're at more of a venue? When you're whether it's just an outdoor space, whether I think there's it can be difficult. When you come there, you sort of think you just have to live with it and you know play with your
Well, I
f-stops.
said before that the first thing I do when I go on location is I look for background. The second thing I look for is lighting.
Yep.
And that is there light there I can use, or do I have to supplement my own lighting? But light is light. And that's the thing. You have to be a student of lighting. I am obsessed probably with lighting. I cannot watch a TV show without watching all of the lighting and from scene to scene in a movie and watch what's going on because and so you have to be it's that's part of that thing I was saying earlier about learning to see.
Yep.
You have to learn to see light. Look, you don't need a camera. You're driving down the road, you can be looking around, just look at the sunlight. Look what happens when it looks at 9 o'clock in the morning, what it looks like at noon, looks like in the afternoon. Become familiar with how light reacts and what happens to it. The next trick is learning to modify it. So light is light. It doesn't matter if it's sunlight, daylight, or strobe, or incandescent, or LED. Your job is to control the light. And if you learn to control the light, you can make it do whatever you want. You can make it warm, you can make it cool, you can change the direction. So it goes back again to story, right? So what am I trying to say? If I'm doing something that's a lifestyle shoot, okay, my stuff, let me back up. My style is very dramatic, very people call it cinematic. I love dramatic lighting, but that wouldn't be appropriate if I were doing an ad campaign for a home or a cosmetic company. So I have to match the lighting has to match the story, what I'm trying to tell. And so that goes back to, again, it's one of those elements you were referring to. You're talking about lenses and bokeh and that kind of stuff. Lighting helps tell that story. Is it warm lighting? Is it cool lighting? What am I trying to do with the lighting? So in an on location environment, the first thing you have to do is figure out, is the light going to help me or hurt me? If it's going to hurt me, I have to block it, or I have to diffuse it, or do something with it to, like, so for example, if you're just a hobbyist and you're going to go out and shoot some photos of a friend or your loved one or something like that, find a shade tree. Find a tree you can put them underneath, and then add a little bit of supplement, even if it's a pop-up flash on your camera, to add a little bit of fill light. That will, because now you have more control of it. You're not fighting the sun and the squinting and the shadows. You now have, and so what most people, I light everything I shoot. Almost 99% of everything I shoot, even the stuff outdoors that doesn't look lit, is lit. And the reason I do that is it gives me complete control. I can make the image anything I want. I can make it dramatic. I can make it lifestyle.
Yep.
But by not by having those controls, I can tell the story I want to tell.
So one of the things that I think is interesting, and this is sort of speaking as from the videographer side of this, is that light as a videographer is a continuum that's going to change over the time that you're at a location. So some of it, in my thinking, and I'd love to get your more informed opinion, is that you have to understand what the light is going to be doing over time, uh, to sort of figure out, because you're really compromised and you can't go and necessarily do different lighting setups throughout an event as you go from 2 to 5. You have to sort of live with what you got and figure it. So I'm just curious, like how you would think of that, and where you have.
Well, let's say, here's a typical example. You're even indoors. Okay, but you have a lot of window light. Well, that's mixed lighting condition. If you're adding your own lighting, let's say it's incandescent light inside, it's very warm, but outside it's going to, the light coming in is very, very cool. So that mixed lighting condition can be a problem. And as you said, it's going to change over time. So in that situation, there would be an example where I may want, if I'm going to be shooting over a long period of time, I would want to kill that light coming from outside and add my own lighting. And you'll see that many, many times. They'll block the light coming in the window and add their own high powered lighting with a gobo or some kind of grid
Yep.
to give it, they'll look like a window, okay, because that gives them complete control. They can shoot anytime, day or night time, and it will always look the same and always match.
Yeah.
So again, it's all a matter of controlling it. So you may want to kill it, or you may want to add your own,
Or gel or other things to
or gel.
change the color
But again,
temperature.
sunlight, a cloud comes over, and all of a sudden, hang on, we got to stop,
Yep.
right? Because now all of a sudden the color temperatures change. So the poor guy who's doing the grading is going to be killing you. He's going to just cut his throat because he's going to grade every frame, and that's going to, he's not going to like you very much. So that's why you want to have complete control over it.
So if you if if you're looking at this from the perspective, of capturing the image, what have you learned as a photographer that you think were the greatest lessons to bring into doing video? So like you're.
Well, photography is much easier. When you're using photography, you can use strobes, which have a very, very short duration and freeze everything. And you can and so and what people don't realize that are new photographers is that shutter speed, when you're using strobe photography, has no control over the flash. I can shoot at 1 second or 8,000th of a second, and the flash is going to be exactly the same power. It's never going to change. What's going to change is the ambient light. So I'm going to control the ambient light just with the shutter speed. Well, in video, you don't have that ability. Your shutter speed is locked. So you're screwed on that part. So now you've lost one of the three elements: your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter. Is no One of those is no longer available to you. So you only have two other tools to work with. So that means you got to really know your lighting, because now you got to really change that lighting, increase the lighting, decrease it.
Yeah.
And of course, it's incandescent. It's or not incandescent. It's constant light. So therefore, that affects things because it's typically not the same amount of power that you get in a burst of a flash. So it's a whole nother challenge. But again, light is light. So if you know
Yep.
lighting, you just got to figure out how to modify it to make it do what you want. It's a beast, but you can do it.
So
Here's the thing: if you learn, I promise you, if you learn nothing about photography or nothing about video, if you learn lighting, it will change your confidence level forever. You will become a much better videographer and a much better photographer, because lighting will give you complete control over any situation. And again, let's say you're going to do a shoot indoors, okay? and it's all of a sudden it's going to be supposed to be nice, but all of a sudden you're planning on using window light. Guess what? Now it's going to be raining. What am I going to do? You can't cancel the shoot.
Yep.
You have to be able to supplement that and correct for that problem. That's what a client's going to expect you to do.
So we have two more things. First, Dean is asking a question. Dean, why don't we? I'd love to get to this. Why don't we do this in the post show? And we'll everybody that wants to chip in and has something to share, we'll definitely get to that. Greg also had a comment, which is interesting because he said he actually disagrees. He thinks video is way easier than stills. So he's saying you can
Well,
shoot with
that's
cameras.
the instigator. That's the heckler part I told you about. See, he and I disagree on most things, um, but that's good because there's nothing wrong with that. Well, I guess so. There's no audio in video there, Greg. You forgot about that part. That makes it a lot more complicated. Now, I will agree with him in the sense that if you are doing video or even stills with constant light and you're starting off, it does make it easier because you can see the shadows. You can see the light. It's easier to learn what's going on in the light. With strobes, it's a little harder because they're so quick. You got to do what's called chimping. You got to look at the back of the camera, take another shot, doing so. And most photographers nowadays don't know how to use light meters, so they don't even know how to do that part. But anyway, the point is that it is harder for stills if you're using
Yeah,
strobes
Greg has an
with
important
audio.
question.
See, that's it. See here, I
so, so I was about ready to yell at Joe.
no, no, it was on my end. Sorry.
so, all right. So I think what is it? Let's talk a bit about the sort of improving skills because I think this is important. Everybody that gets into any one of these creative arts needs some way to progress. And people talk about practice and other things, but how do you actually improve? How do you become better technically, and how do you become better creatively? Because they're really two different paths in my mind for those.
They definitely are. It's definitely a left brain, right brain kind of thing. Like I said before, you're going to find some people that are going to be more inclined to lean toward the technical, and you're going to have some that are lean toward the aesthetic. Like I have a friend of mine, Sharon. The woman is amazing. Um, and she is pure artist. I mean, she knows some of the technical stuff, but she and I will go out and she'll shoot stuff, and I'm like, you shot this with your phone. It's just she has a way of seeing that I don't have, and so, but her images are amazing and compelling. So the first thing I would say is don't get hung up on the equipment. Everyone's like, what camera should I buy? Doesn't matter. If you don't have a camera, use your phone. But the thing is, start learning to see. That's the first thing that will improve your photography. You can take pictures. I take pictures all day long and I'm never leaving the house or I'm never have a camera with me. You can look and see and say, oh, that'd be a great picture. Oh, look how that light. Oh, there's a great location. I need to come back and check that out. What time is it? Okay. So always be looking for photos. I call it active seeing. That's the first thing you can do to become a better photographer. Again, don't worry about the camera. Whatever you have, use whatever you have. You don't have to have the fanciest camera. That's not going to make a difference. The second thing is don't get hung up on the technical. Now, this is something that I preach, and a lot of people disagree with me, but that's okay. People say you have to learn to shoot on manual. I totally disagree with that. And the reason is to start, you need to learn the exposure triangle. You need to understand how exposure and aperture and shutter speed and ISO interact, but not to start with. You need to learn to see first and learn to tell a story. And you do that by practicing, by taking courses, whatever it may be, and talking and working with somebody that knows more and has been done it before, whether it's Greg or somebody else that has done this before, and look at their work. It's also a very similar approach to we were talking about musicians. I describe music. You get a guitar. What do? You learn the chords, right? Well, that's learning aperture, shutter, ISO. Okay. Then what do you do next? You buy a songbook and you start practicing somebody's song. that's the same thing. Look at work you admire. What is you look when you see a photo you like, analyze what it is you like about it. Why do I like that photo? I test people when I see their work, and I do photo reviews on the first Friday of every month on Photo Mentor, and I always like to ask, why did you take this picture? What was it you saw there? Because there's something there you saw that drew you to that picture, that image, and try and analyze what that was. Because that, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but let's remember every photo has you in it. The lens you select, the settings you select, the location where you stand, everything about it is all you. And so the more you're in touch with why you're doing something and what you see in a photo, the better photographer you're going to be. And then again, so that would be just start taking pictures. Background, background, background is the second thing I tell you. Start looking, tell a story. Look at the background. Does it help or hurt? The next thing I tell you is when you start to take, before you push that button, look at all four corners of the frame. All right. What's it there? The front, what's in the middle of the frame is probably going to take care of itself most of the time. But what's going to happen on the corners is going to help you or hurt you. Is it something coming into the frame? Is it something sticking out of their head? And that will make a big difference in improving your photography. And then the last thing would be to try and learn something about art. I think I was showing you. Let me show you if this is something that I was talking about before. There's 7 elements that define art, or how art is defined: line, shape, form, space, texture, value, and color. These things are like languages. They tell us they tell us things. Shapes, a round shapes mean something different than a square shape. A horizontal line versus a vertical lines denote strength. Horizontal lines do not. So these are languages, these are skills that you need to look in every picture and learn what that means and how you can use that to help improve your photography and to help communicate what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, and
I don't know.
I think I think that it's also important that people both give criticism and receive it in the right spirit. So as sort of as a community, we talk a lot about the community of photographers, videographers, streamers. I think in all of these disciplines, it's important that people learn to be constructive in their critique, but also people don't take it as something that's offensive when somebody
Well,
tries to
it's
help.
hard. It's hard. Let me tell you, we all every as long as I've been doing this, I still am, my own work. I'm still, you send a client some work. Okay. This happens all the time. You send them your proof sheets or whatever. You don't, it's crickets. You don't hear anything back. All of a sudden, I don't know how long you've been, you're like, oh, they hated them. They didn't like them. What's going on? They didn't call me back. I'm like, hey, look, they got lives. They got other things going on. You're not the most important thing. But we all want to know, do they at least like them? They don't have to give us praise, but do they, am I screw up or do they like them?
Yeah.
So it happens to everybody. But yeah, so I have a motto, and it's basically educate, encourage, mentor. Those are the three things I live by. I want to help educate people. I want to encourage them with, constructively. I'm not going to discourage anybody. And then I want to help mentor them and give them advice on what they can do to improve. And I think if you come from a place of giving and heart and helping people, then I think that will come across.
So that's really what you're focused on mostly now, in addition to, doing photography as a career. You also are very into sort of the mentoring side here.
Yeah, I've been shooting for 30 years. I've been teaching for 10 years, probably. My expertise is really lighting. I teach lighting. I teach, photography. I teach Photoshop and Lightroom. And what I realize is I just really enjoy helping new photographers. And over the last year, I've been spending a lot of time in these groups looking at new photographers, Facebooks, and I discovered that I got very frustrated, quite frankly, because I see these myths that are repeated. People say these things that are not true. That are basically what happens is they've watched a YouTube video and then they repeat it, but they've never done it. It's kind of like learning to ride a bicycle, right? I could have a PhD in bike design, but never have ridden a bicycle. I can tell you all about bicycles, but I can't tell you, I can tell you how to ride one technically, but I've never ridden one. And so it's very frustrating because I see this over and over. So that's why I started this every Friday night on Facebook and YouTube and now LinkedIn. I have this thing called Photo Mentor TV, and I do an hour of question and answers from people that want to ask me anything they want to ask me, and then we have some kind of topic I'll talk about. Because I got tired of seeing this information that was not correct repeated over and over again. And so anyway, so that's what I'm spending a lot of time doing. And then that now has evolved into we're about ready to launch Photo Mentor Academy, which is a more structured training, education, and also group coaching and one-on-one coaching, because I found people needed more than that.
Hmm.
I was on the helping somebody the other night in New Zealand for 3 hours with Lightroom because they were having a question. And so I do this kind of stuff all the time, all over the world. And I just found, I really need to do more. I'm not doing enough. I'm not reaching enough people, and I wanted to help more and more people. So I've kind of devoted my full time career to that. I mean, I'm still doing live streaming for other clients and things like that. But training and teaching and helping young photographers is really my passion.
So, Lee, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today because is great having you on here. I'd
Well,
like
thank
to.
you, John. I felt like I made it. I'm on the network now. I made it. Before I'm just my own little show over there, and now all of a sudden the network called and said, "Hey, we want an interview. Are you kidding? I'm here, buddy."
So, well, if you don't mind, I'd love you to stick around for the post show in case anybody has any other questions, and we had a few others.
Okay.
So, all right. So everybody, I just want to say thank you all for joining. If you can stick around for the post show, Lee will be with us, and we can dig a bit deeper into some of the things we talked about. Uh, if not, I want to thank all of you for joining us this Friday, and we will see all of you next Friday. Take care. Be back in a few. Hi, everyone. We're back for the post show here, and Lee, I believe you're still here with us.
I am.
Okay, excellent. So, w- a couple quick things that popped up. So, John Drinkwater said he said, prepare light and sound in advance, then you have less to do in post. Uh, that's actually good on a couple of fronts because I think we've become very comfortable, sort of doing a lot of post work or just photoshopping or lightrooming stuff after the fact, as opposed to trying to
Uh,
capture the best up front.
People nowadays in photography think Photoshop is a way to fix things. Oh, shooting raw. And hey, Mike, how you doing, buddy? It's like, oh, I'll just shoot in raw and then I can fix it and I can take this. But the problem is they don't seem to understand that if you're doing this for a living, that costs you money. Every hour you're standing sitting in front of that computer is costing you money. And they take these jobs and they spent what they don't realize is by the end of the job they're probably making the same amount as a burger flipper because they spent 2 weeks editing the photo they could have fixed in 6 seconds if you just move this much to the left or this much to the right and looked at that frame I'm talking about in that background. They wouldn't have to worry about removing something or taking or adding something or fixing something.
So there was another question Dean was asking before we, early in the show, and now I think it's probably a good time because uh, I think this has impacted a lot of people. Uh, where what have you seen that? Now I know Greg also could probably chime in here as well because I know that he transitioned a lot more to video work, over the past year. So,
Yeah, it's I think I've worked with a lot of people and I have a lot of friends that are in the same situation, and I think the first thing to remember is it's here to stay. It's not about a COVID thing anymore. What happened is COVID was a proof of concept. It proved that it was a beta test before that. We all thought we all knew it was working, but nobody else did. Now the world has adopted the Zoom world or whatever you want to call it, and they know now that we can do this remotely. And so now that's great because now the floodgates have been open. Now they're open to you. Not having to. I used to describe it as you're 6 feet underground. You have to dig yourself up to the level to even start talking about those stuff. What you can offer. You're already above the ground now. They understand the need. All you have to do now is build your expertise and your talent to be able to do TDing remotely, whether from your location or on some site. But there's definitely a demand out there. I think that we're slowly starting to go back to more in-person events, but I think that's going to change. What's going to happen now is it's going to be a hybrid. There's going to be some in person, excuse me, in person, but they're realizing I can reach a much bigger audience as well by not just doing the in person, but also doing the outreach. So you're in a great position, and you're going to be, if you have the talent and the ability, you're in a great position to take advantage of this.
So, I mean, Greg just jumped in with, that people are starting to understand it better as well. But
Yeah.
I think one of the things to underline in this, and this is something we talked about during the show, is you still need to communicate. So it sort of comes back to what's going to distinguish the people who are good at this versus somebody who's just sort of grabbing a Zoom screen and streaming it, is that you have to learn how to communicate a message, tell a story,
Well, it's
engage
probably
people.
one of the most frustrating things for me because of exactly that. Everybody was like Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. And I'm like, well, Zoom, there's no branding, there's no graphics. I mean, there's some of it, but the point is that's what's nice about doing vMix or something else. You can take that source and you can actually wrap some stuff around it and add some value to it. It's hard with Zoom because it's a conferencing system. And that's exactly right, John. The message is, and that's what I would say is if you're talking to a client, what is it they're trying to do? How do I help them get their message out? That's what your job is, not to just stream. The streaming, I don't even like the word streaming in a way because it sort of denotes the medium, not the it's broadcasting is what it is, and broadcasting is getting a message across. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is about that. And so if you start with a client and if you talk to the client about that up front instead of just doing the technical part, you're going to find they're going to go, wow, this guy really gets it. He's part of what we. So one of the games I play is I think of myself, okay, if I go in to talk to a client, I'm thinking if I were in their job, if I had their job, what would I want to be knowing? What would I be asking? How would I want to be solving their problem? So find out what the problem is and then figure out how to solve it. Because what we have is our expertise as photographers or videographers or whatever. Is we know what can be done. We understand the capability. They do not. So they'll come to you and say, "We want to do a conference." Okay, that's great. What kind of conference? Who's your audience? Who's your target audience? Who you're trying to reach? Focus on what they're trying to do, not what you're trying to do. I describe it when I talk to my clients. It's not about me. It's not about me making pretty pictures. My job is to make them successful. If I can make them successful, and whatever they're trying to do, whether it's making money or whatever, then I'll be successful.
Yeah, I mean, because in a lot of ways, it comes back to traditional, salesmanship around, what is it that you need to communicate? What's the opportunity cost? How much, do you have invested in the product, the concept, the message, all the things that sort of go into it? And then turn around and saying, if you cheap out on articulating that message and in sharing it, in reaching people, all of these factors sort of come in to say, it's actually costing you a lot more. So when people are like, oh, Zoom's free, I can just, there are elements to this that are, really important. And yeah, John, that's 100%. I think when you can add that extra value, then you're moving in the right space. You're thinking about it sort of in the right context.
Yeah. The one thing about Zoom, I'm not a big Zoom fan, but I realize it's become a commodity. It's become ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's kind of path of least resistance. So it's a way to get into the door and integrate that, and again add value, as John's saying, with adding lower thirds and showing, hey, we can do this and I can do that. And I think Greg's a good example of that. He's someone that has started with Zoom, and then I think he's now transition people to moving into vmix and cloud stuff and things like that and doing a much higher quality production. And that's really, again, that's what people are going to want, right?
Yeah.
They're going to start with Zoom, and then they're going to see their competition using something else and go, well, wait a minute, why aren't we using that?
Yeah, I mean, because it's also, we talk about the currency. We think about it a lot from our end as producers, but the currency that people are spending as consumers is their attention. It's that whole attention economy thing. So we have to give them a reason to watch. I mean, so, and I think that's part of it. You have to be able to engage with people and connect with them. And if you don't do that, then they're not necessarily going to pay attention.
No. Yeah, and that's where the conference call thing falls down. It's just okay, a bunch of people on a screen listening or watching, yawning, whatever. So,
It's the syndrome where you're like looking at people's dogs go down the basement stairs
yeah,
behind them and stuff. It's like that's
barking.
more interesting.
Well, it's to take it full circle. It's the same thing I was talking about the photography thing. You're telling a story. What's the story you're trying to tell? And the story is, if you can be a government, you can be whatever. The thing is, they have a message they want to get across, and the better you can help them with that, the more you're going to be in demand.
So, I mean, I think I agree. I think that's where it probably has to start from before you get into any of the tech. Like, who do you
Yeah.
want to reach? What's the message you want to reach them with? And then you can start to work backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the difference really between a producer and a technical director, quite frankly. Technical director, for the most part, is making sure everything's working and the signal's getting from A to B. And that's great. I mean, I did that for years. I loved it. But producing is a whole nother game. That's really where you're trying to figure out how do I help this customer or client get the results they want?
So, so everybody, I just want to we're I don't want to keep Lee too long here, but if anybody has any other questions or any other things they'd like,
Except Greg, he's already reached his quota.
so so please just get them in here. But I did want to talk, Lee, very quickly a bit about what you're doing with the uh, photo mentor and you know who is that really? Greg is saying it's a three heckle limit.
That's right. You shot the concert three. The three photo limit, and you're out. That's the way they. That's funny.
So you know from the photo mentor side, why don't you just talk a bit about what that is and like what because I think it would definitely be worthwhile for people to tune in and sort of see what you do because that's
Well,
probably a microcosm of.
well, there's two things going on there. A couple things. Number one is from a production standpoint. I mean, I'm a guy that I wasn't doing video that much. I did video long years ago, but I understood it. I know how it works, and I have more and more clients wanting to do it. So it wasn't a big transition for me. But I have now gone full blown, pretty big deal, streaming kind of a thing with, multiple streams and monitors and vmix and encoders and all that kind of stuff. So, from a production standpoint, you might actually find it kind of interesting. It's really more photo oriented, but that's really what I'm doing here. So every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I do Photo Mentor TV. And like I said, I do that on Facebook. You can go to facebook.photomentor.tv. You can go to youtube.photomentor.tv, or you can go to linkedin.photomentor.tv, and that'll take you to the live stream. So the purpose of that show is to help educate people, kind of give them some understanding, answer questions. I think this week tonight we're doing a quiz. We do kind of a photo quiz thing. So you can go in and see how smart you are. See if you're smarter than a fifth grader or whatever it may be. Um, and then the first Friday of the month, for example, you submit photos throughout the month, and then the first Friday of the month, I do photo reviews. The photo reviews are not whether I like the thing. That's again, this thing got me upset. You go to Facebook and you get likes on a photo. Well, that number one, these people know less than you do about photography. What good does that do, right? Oh, I like this. So great. Oh, it's beautiful. I'm looking at it. It's a stupid sunset I've seen 1,000 times. So anyway, the point is, so I try to give them really solid, creative, and real world expertise on something. Don't know everything, but I have experts that come on when I do. Don't know something. And then, so like I said, so that's what we do every Friday night at 9 o'clock. Then the Photo Mentor Academy, as you were referring to, is really a way to take that and extend it much more in depth, much more one on one. And it's just, we're just now getting ready to launch that, as starting that in the next couple of weeks. And that's going to be a whole nother thing. That's where I'm really going to be able to deep dive and more hand holding on education for people that really want to know, go beyond what they're doing right now.
Okay, cool. So thanks for sharing that. We have a couple more questions. The first
Sure.
is, do you see the vMix platform continuing past the pandemic?
I that's a good question, Mike. And I tell you what, I think, and let me explain to you my perspective first of all, so you understand where I'm coming from. So I used to work for a software company, and when I joined them, they were a $3 million company. When I left, it was a $2.2 billion company. So you learn a few things about software development, and you learn about product management and what customers are looking for. I think right now vMix is in a great position, but I worry if they're going to be continuing that, because I think they're vulnerable with what's going on with the cloud and some of these other things going on. Because the product, in my opinion, from a personal standpoint, I like it. It's great. It has all kinds of crazy capabilities. It's solid, but it's not very TV oriented. It's not very production oriented. It's very PC oriented. It's almost like it's a computer kind of program, not a production program. And I worry about whether they're going to be able to continue in that vein, and whether somebody else is going to either come in and usurp them. I think the streaming market will continue. I don't know if vMix is going to be a part of that or not.
So yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, we use TriCaster here, even though I talk a
Yeah.
lot about vMix. Uh, but it is, I do think that is probably the biggest drawback that vMix has. But
Well, look at multi-view, right? That's been my biggest, the multi-view, the layered capability, that capability within vMix. It's amazing. It's really great, but it's broken in my opinion. It's the worst. It looks like it was written by a completely different company. It doesn't act. There's no cancel. I can't even exit out of. If I make a mistake, I can't undo anything. That's a basic programming. You know that, John. And so I don't understand how they can release a product that's that broken on something that every one of us touch. That's a feature everyone that uses vMix touches.
so
Anyway, so that's just kind of my rant about that kind of stuff. So you're right, TriCaster may not have quite the capability, but it's certainly more production oriented, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, and it's also, everybody's going to go with what, I mean, I've always said the shortest distance between 2 points is the one I know, because I don't get
Yeah.
lost. So there's a certain element of that in this as well, where, if people are comfortable with it, they'll stick with it. But I think taking the point more broadly that Mike is asking is, I think that I think that we're going to see a hybrid of live and remote, and that is the biggest change that's probably happened. So the concept, will there be pieces, components that will be part of this hybrid infrastructure? Will it be vMix? I don't know, but I definitely think that hybrid space is now here to stay, and it's not.
Well, the Bird Dog product the cloud product you showed last week was phenomenal. That the capability that it gives somebody is just unbelievable.
So yeah, I mean, and that's just one example. And we have another question from Lighting Video TV. So he's saying, because this is a perfect fit in, how will the advanced NDI5 features affect,
There's actually
streaming?
an NDI 5, really? I heard they announced something, but then they went dark. What happened to it?
So no, it's
There's a,
so,
there's a typical example, by the way. There's a marketing faux pas, in my opinion. You announce something and then you can't deliver it, so now they've lost all the momentum. And I'm talking about NDI 5,
so
right? I mean, where is it? They should have been within a week or two of announcing. Anyway, that's just my marketing background coming in, going, I think they screwed up with that.
but no, I think all of these things together there are going to be a lot more options for connecting
Yeah.
with people remotely. But I think in all of these solutions, there's a lot more than just the connection. I mean, that's a camera at the end of the day. So whether that camera reaches out across the internet or whether it's local, you're providing a camera there. But there's a lot of technical pieces that go with this. How do you work with people on and off air? Sort of all the workflow stuff that you need to do around that, especially when you're dealing with people remotely. There's going to be things around audio, which I know doesn't really exist in video, but the audio space for how you manage that, different mix minus groups, how do you work with large numbers of people versus smaller numbers of people and still have engagement. So I think in the space, while things like NDI5 are definitely going to help with building the connections, you're still dealing with the overall workflow and how you produce a show and all the needs that sort of sit around that are
The
going to create.
pre-production is really where the money is, in my opinion.
So
If
yeah,
you can lay pre-production and production and producing a product for somebody, that's really where you need to be. Because other stuff's just going to be what I and look in the networking world. It was really complex when I first started. Ethernet? Are you kidding? There was like Ethernet, token ring, ArcNet, all these different kinds of technologies. That's now gone away, right? IP, you just plug it in and it works. The same thing's going to happen in what you're talking about in video. So the real work is what do you do on top of that?
yeah, and I think because we talked a bit about this with John's question about doing avoiding post work with doing the right thing up front. I think it's the same thing here. Workflow is critical, and it's critical not just for quality but also for efficiency. How can you produce a show without having to run around like crazy or touch 20 different machines or try to coordinate with 10 different people to get one shot done. So I think there's going to be a lot more focus going forward on workflow, and especially when you're dealing with people remotely, because that's another layer of complexity. These people have to
Well, every
feel
time you touch that,
disconnected.
it adds costs, right?
Yep.
Every time you have to, what you're saying, all that workflow so you're talking about, it's not just because it's technical. That adds cost to a production. And so the more you can deal with that, the more you're going to be more competitive and you're going to be able to do more efficiency.
Cost and risk, which are the two things actually.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's true.
so uh, so let's see. Greg just said. Oh, Greg is talking about the vmix scripting. That was what we had talked about earlier. That he's he thinks the shows that we've been doing are good for this.
They're fantastic. And
So
again, it's a technical subject, but it's given me so much more on the creative side of what I can do from a production and an artistic standpoint. So I think you should, that's definitely applaud you, John, for doing that. Because you may not, I don't know if you've intended to do that or not, but it really has inspired me to want to do more.
well, that actually is the goal, and I think it's really coming. It's technical, but coming from a creative place. So.
Yeah.
But so last thing, Lightning Video just mentioned that NDI5 is released today. I know that's on the developer
Oh,
side, but so definitely, if you can, grab your copy and Let's start exploring it. It's definitely that will be a subject for another show. So
yeah.
so.
Plumbing 101.
Some days it feels like you're actually doing plumbing.
Well,
So,
that's what I was saying about the networking stuff. It's just plumbing now. It's just wires. I mean, one time it was like voodoo. How do you get stuff from one place to another? Protocols, conversions, and all that kind of stuff. You don't deal with that anymore. And now that's the same thing will happen in the video world.
So yeah, I mean, because uh, Lightning Video just asked, do you see network integration in cameras natively? And will that be pushed by end users expecting simple integration? Uh, let me.
Some cameras, it's a cost issue, really. NDI, it does fine. Notice every camera I see that has NDI is at least $300 more than any other camera.
So that's licensing for that.
Yes, exactly.
But the other piece of this, and the difficulty isn't in having NDI in the camera. It's building the network. It's synchronizing audio and video. It's basically having all of the infrastructure in place, networking, as well as the analog ends of what you display and the sound that goes with it. Those things are the real challenges. So I when you talk about end users expecting simple integration, I think there is a certain element of marketing that companies are doing in that, but ultimately, uh, all of these products and everybody using NDI, you've got to appreciate the depth that goes beyond sort of that first, I get the picture from here to there, I get the sound from here to there. But when you do it in scale, when you do it, across larger productions, you still need a fairly deep and broad skill set around a lot of different things that sort of surround that.
A lot of moving parts in there. A lot of moving parts. Let me ask you a question, John, if you don't mind, before we go.
Yeah.
What is your view on the combination or conflict or whatever word you want to use about Dante and NDI? Because that seems to me they're kind of at opposite. I mean, Dante has become a standard, it seems to me, in the audio world, and now you've got NDI, but they don't always play real well together. So, what's your view on those two technologies?
So, I mean, they're both essentially doing very similar things. Just, Dante, Ordinate has both audio and video. I mean, most people don't know, but they have AV video side too. And NDI does both. And I know they're pushing more into the audio side with NDI 5. NewTek still has a way to go with sort of replacing that Dante footprint. And there's multiple reasons. I mean, some of them is uh, some of it deals around how you configure it. I mean, with Dante, you can configure things centrally, and that gives you a lot of flexibility in an AV situation where I may have speakers all over and microphones coming in. My ability to go and start to route everything using Dante controller from one location as opposed to having to go to the endpoints and do that sort of configuration at all the endpoints for what do you want to receive and what do you want to send. So I think that is going to make a big difference. And also, I think there's just maturity of the products right now. The Ordinate has great clocking and synchronization and other things. NDI has those things in the technical side, but I don't think it's risen up in the productization yet. And
Hmm.
this is something we'll have to probably see over the next 18 months. But I know before the Viz RT acquisition that was something NewTek was seriously interested in, but it may just be you know, maybe basically a moot point now. If with Viz, that may not be their emphasis, so it may
I
just
don't
be
know.
going
It
away.
looks like they're gunning for Audinate, in my opinion. I think NDI, I think NDI really wants that business.
I think they do, but it's going to be a question of priorities and resources. So,
Yeah.
and
Well,
they
and with the embedding of the hardware, all the Dante hardware stuff, it really makes it difficult.
yeah, and it's also, I mean, Newtek's got a lot on the plate now with going across the internet because that's
Yeah.
introducing a
Oh
whole
yeah.
lot of complex technologies into the mix. So I think they're going to have to mature as well. So so Chad just said he's just taking a break from playing with NDI 5 and asking how everybody's doing. So Chad, thank you, thank you for joining us
Uh-oh.
and breaking away
Oh,
from NDI
no, just
five. So
yeah, no, no, no. I've got you in trouble, John. I'm sorry.
no, no.
My rant about NDI and their announcement.
So no, I totally get where you're coming from on that, Lee. So
All right.
let me just say again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. This was
Happy to
great.
do it. You know I am. Anytime.
So and so let me just everybody thank you for hanging around for the post show, and we'll be back next week, same social channel, same time, and we'll talk about something. Hopefully, everyone's going to be interested in. So everybody, take care. Thank you very much.